High up in the hills of New Hampshire, where the tallest mountains in the east rise majestically towards crisp blue New England skies, lies a century-old stretch of railroad track winding its way down through the Mount Washington Valley. Its rails kept alive by the small, hard-working, and wonderful Conway Scenic Railroad, nestled in the valley below. Located in the quaint village of North Conway, New Hampshire, on the edge of the valley, this tourist railroad continues the tradition of train travel as if it were another era. People of all ages gather here to enjoy the hustle and bustle of railroading as it was years ago. Much has changed here since 1872, when these tracks were first put down. But some things will never change. It's the hard work and dedication of the men and women who make this railroad exist yesterday and today, and people like you who love trains and continue to be part of the excitement of the Conway Scenic Railroad. Conductors, dispatchers, and engineers are busy running passenger-filled trains up and down the track, keeping these rails polished and action-packed, all with the same determination and enthusiasm that brought the railroads through this valley over 120 years ago. People behind the scene are also hard at work, like owner Russ Seabold, making sure everyone is enjoying the atmosphere at the Conway Scenic Railroad.
What we want to do is we want to continue doing what we are in terms of providing a site where there is preservation of a railroad. If they come here and they have a good time, I mean, they get value for their money, they get a train ride, they understand a little bit more about trains, they have an experience with a steam locomotive. You know, that's what we're here for.
Webster, the operations manager, keeps the trains running smoothly up to the platform day in and day out, particularly during some of the special events. Today, the railroad is having a birthday. Every year, riders and crew have some extra fun by running extra trains to celebrate August the 4th, 1974, the day the Conway Scenic Railroad was born. All aboard! Rusted rails on this stretch of track are a thing of the past.
The tracks were laid down in 1872 as part of the Portsmouth, Great Falls and Conway Railroad. Passenger service ended in December 1961. Up until that time, you still had the ability to board the train here in North Conway, head down the branch to Rollinsford, New Hampshire, join the main line to Portland, and go right into Boston's North Station.
Today, the ride ends here in Conway, 5.5 miles south of the Conway Scenic's main terminal. Here you can get out, look around, and imagine what it was like years ago when students attending nearby Kennett High School were dropped off by the B&M passenger trains in much the same manner. After 10:55 runs around the train, it's time to head back to North Conway, catching some magnificent views along the way, like the Moat Range or Cathedral Ledge, where rock climbers from around the country challenge the steep and dangerous cliff. Pulling its cars up one of the steepest grades in the East, 1055 works hard. But the 3.2% grade is no match for this 124-ton Alco. 1055 is a 1950 S4 diesel. This 1,000 horsepower engine originally worked for the Portland Terminal Company and is now Conway Scenic's #1 diesel, pulling more trains each season than any of the other 3 operating locomotives on the Conway Scenic roster. Now fully restored, 1055 runs around the train for another scheduled departure in front of the magnificent North Conway Railroad Station.
The station was built in 1874 and today remains pretty much as it was then. The terminal area is on the National Register of Historic Places and is one of the few original complete terminal areas still existing in the country with its original buildings.
That is one of the special elements of this railroad, the fact that all the buildings are original, right down to the air-driven turntable, which can spin any 100-ton locomotive right in front of the roundhouse. Today, inside this 4-stall facility, boiler crews are hard at work inside the steam locomotive 7470, Conway Scenic's flagship. Maintained its own motive power in much the same fashion here inside this engine house. For 82 years, this was a familiar sight inside and out. In the beginning, business was good for the B&M. During the 1950s, however, automobile travel eroded passenger counts to the point where the B&M could no longer afford to run scheduled passenger service. Over the next 20 years, freight service declined, and the B&M abandoned portions of the Conway branch. Finally, on Halloween morning, October the 31st, 1972, a diesel switcher, pulling only a caboose, headed south through the cold rain. People watching felt they would never see an engine in Boston and Maine colors ride these rails again. Little did they know. For a number of years now, the Conway Scenic Railroad has hosted the Boston and Maine Railroad Historical Society's annual B&M Day, a day to pay tribute to the once mighty B&M Railroad. On the second Saturday in August every year, folks gather to relive the grand era when the Boston and Maine Railroad provided train travel in and out of the Mount Washington Valley. Every summer, eager rail fans ride in these restored coaches, experiencing what it was like to be part of the B&M as it was over 30 years ago. One person who knows what it was like better than most of us is Rudy Hood, who was a B&M engineer for over 20 years. Rudy operated all kinds of motive power for the B&M and even operated this same engine during its heyday.
I started out with 48. Well, they had the old FTs, they call them, the earlier diesel, and the F2s and the F3s. The FTs, you had to have a fireman on. If you were a fireman, hey, if you're getting hot, you had to go back and throw in the fans. They wouldn't do it automatically like this one does.
Rudy feels right at home in 4266. This beautifully restored EMD F7, with its huge 16-cylinder, 1,500 horsepower engine, still can bring a thrill worth capturing on film as it runs by this group of B&M rail fans. On the rear of Mixed Extra 4266 is a red caboose packed with rail enthusiasts. And Roger Robar, who is riding in his own personal caboose, soaking up the age-old sounds of railroading.
I've always loved trains since I was a little kid. My father used to take me down to the railroad station to watch the trains come by. And this was back when they still had steam. That desire, that urge is still in there. This has been a fantasy of mine of owning a piece of real railroad equipment. So I jumped at the chance to buy into this caboose. There's so many good people that's involved in this hobby. It's all I can say is it's just the greatest.
With Boston and Main Day behind them, early morning crews are back to work on 7470, getting New Hampshire's only operating standard gauge coal-fired steam locomotive ready for the railroad's most colorful event of the year.
Just make sure that thing is over the hole.
This thing, when you come through.
That's got to go through that, too.
You got it.
Conway Scenic's own Roundhouse Rat, a nickname given to master mechanic Courtney Gregg, leads his crew through the maintenance procedures under this 160-ton locomotive.
All right, we got to get this main rod up and see where it... Well, is that going to stay?
Yeah.
All right. No, they're kind of a novelty today because you don't see that many of them. You know, in the heyday of steam, that's all people used to see. But today, about the only place I can see a steam engine is a tourist railroad.
Built in 1921 by the Grand Trunk Railroad in Montreal, this 060 is over 70 years old, and the tender care that is given to her today will keep her 51-inch drivers turning a long time.
These engines were built way over their design. They were built to last, and they were built to run virtually forever as long as they were maintained.
While sounds from inside stall number 1 escape outside, yard crews are busy preparing for the Conway Scenic Railroad's biggest event of the season. At the end of each summer, everyone here looks forward to celebrating Rail Fans Day, a Saturday in mid-September when the Conway Scenic Railroad opens the throttle another notch on everything this railroad has to offer. It's a big day, and switching begins weeks before to make sure everything is in place in this busy yard. Switching to a railroad is what coal is like to a steam engine. It's the fuel that fires an operation like the Conway Scenic and sends completed trains down the track. While these folks are working the North Yard today, let's take a break in the action and go inside the depot and look back into the rich history here at the Conway Scenic Railroad. Standing in the museum, one cannot help but wonder about all the travelers that have passed through this magnificent structure over the past century. On display here in the museum, railroad artifacts from the past transport you into the bygone era of train travel. It was a time when crowds would gather and ride the rails, when the town depot was the center of most people's daily lives. In 1874, noted architect Nathaniel J. Bradley built this proud station for the Portsmouth, Great Falls, and Conway Railroad. After the Civil War, the pent-up demand for railroads to transport the products of northern New Hampshire's farms and forests, along with the need to open the growing tourism market, brought about a fever of railroad activity to the Mount Washington Valley area. In 1878, the Portsmouth, Great Falls, and Conway became a division of the mighty Eastern Railroad. Then, 12 years later, was absorbed into the competing Boston and Maine. In 1890, the B&M also took over the rail lines through Franconia Notch, Bethlehem, and Bretton Woods on the west side of the mountains, as well as the Cog Railway to the summit of Mount Washington. The line from Portsmouth to North Conway and Intervale became known as the B&M Conway branch. By the turn of the century, the Boston and Maine opened new avenues of commerce for rural New Hampshire. Thousands of tourists in luxurious parlor cars, Pullman sleeping cars, and elegant diners arrived to spend vacations in grand hotels and small inns. Logging railroads came into town to drop off their loads for the mills to finish into lumber. Granite blocks from local quarries were also brought to town, and the B&M would ship these goods to the big city's market. During the 1930s and 40s, B&M snow trains brought hundreds of skiers to the mountainous region, with almost 5,000 passengers sometimes passing through North Conway Station during those winter weekends. No one then would have suspected that the end of local railroading was in sight for this prosperous area. But it happened fast. With the advent of the automobile, passenger loads dropped to the point where the B&M could no longer afford to run passenger service to the area. On December the 2nd, 1961, the last regularly scheduled self-propelled B&M Budliner pulled away from the station for the final time. For the next 20 years, B&M freight service continued 3 times a week to North Conway, but this too fell victim to hard times being experienced by America's railroads. On October the 31st, 1972, freight service was formally abandoned by the Boston and Maine. The grand old days of railroading seemed to be over for this station. The neglected buildings stood empty with their future looking bleak. But 2 local businessmen wisely purchased the terminal area and its rundown buildings in the hopes that someone would come along and restore dignity and pride back to this abandoned rail yard. Their hopes were answered, for in the winter of 1968, a man by the name of Dwight Smith, himself a B&M veteran, paid a visit to North Conway and immediately fell in love with the old branch line terminal.
In 1968, there was a special rail trip run from Boston to North Conway to reenact the old ski train, and rode up here to North Conway, and there was an hour or 2 layover. And when I got off the train and looked at that station and that roundhouse and that turntable and the area and the views, the light bulb lit. I mean, really, as basic as that. I looked around that facility and I said, oh my God, what a place for a tourist railroad.
Dwight knew what he wanted to do, so within a month, he was back in North Conway, meeting with the owners, Carol Reed and Bill Levy. After agreeing to establish a tourist railroad, Dwight set out to secure trackage rights with a B&M railroad and felt so optimistic that he went out looking for a steam locomotive. His search ended in an old roundhouse up in Sarnia, Ontario. There he found ex-Canadian National 7470 sitting alone since 1960 after switching for an industrial plant. Following an inspection and some dickering, Dwight was the owner of an 060 steam locomotive with no place to run it, because the B&M had decided not to sell the trackage rights to Dwight and his partners. In the meantime, 7470 was shipped and stored at Maine Central's Rigby Yard in South Portland, Maine. There, a group of devoted volunteers spent long weekend hours restoring the steam locomotive. For 3 years, the B&M dragged its feet and finally sold the tracks to a big developer, even though the B&M had been ordered by the Interstate Commerce Commission to sell to anyone willing to continue train operations. Dwight challenged the B&M, and the courts ruled in his favor. So with this good news, Dwight and his band of volunteers stepped up their efforts to restore the North Conway station.
I could see from the outside that it had potential, but inside it was depressing. It was like a haunted house. I mean, the windows were boarded up, and beneath the boards were shards of glass. I mean, things were all broken up. There was trash and litter everywhere. The woodwork was black. I mean, black. It was, 100 years of soot and smoke.
In 1973, the B&M declared bankruptcy, further delaying the start of the long-planned Excursion Railroad. But Dwight and his volunteers ignored these setbacks and continued working, rebuilding the roundhouse roof, which was the biggest job of all. The end was in sight. By May of 1974, Reed, Smith, and Levy incorporated the Conway Scenic Railroad. A few months later, 7470 and her proud crew pulled their first revenue train. The date, August the 4th, 1974. 6.5 years of frustration had finally come to an end, and the Conway Scenic Railroad was operating.
I couldn't have done it alone. I mean, these people that came to me and volunteered their services and their labor, they all had the same goal as I had.
A goal that brings us back here today, with crews putting the final touches on preparations for Railfans Day. Roadmaster Wayne Allen peers down the rails as he and his crew maintain a section of track at the west side curve. Wayne, with the help of modern equipment as well as hand tools, has been in charge of the entire 7.5-mile stretch of track since the Conway Scenic Railroad began running trains over them. Switch Engine 15 is being rewarded after a long day of pushing and pulling cuts of railroad cars around the yard. This original Main Central Railroad 44-tonner looks just as good as it did when it was built back in 1945, and now enjoys a second life running on the rails of this operating museum here at the Conway Scenic. With everything in place, crews retire to their bunk cars and cabooses for an evening of rest where they will sleep overnight and wake to the excitement of Railfans Day. Railfans Day begins early, and the railroad crews meet one last time before things get underway.
Roger Les, Howard Otterberg, keep the folks at a reasonable distance from the track.
This morning, Carl Vitters is lighting the fire in 7470's boiler, so she can build up steam and soon take us on the magnificent foliage runs through the colorful valley. It's 8 o'clock, and the high rail heads to Conway. Now it's time to begin a day of trains and people, run-bys and photo opportunities from one end of the line to the other. A day when everyone pulls out all the stops and celebrates railroading for its own sake.
4266 and throw it back up on the engine lead.
As the clouds in the valley begin to break up, there is a sense that something is about to happen here as a cool, crisp night takes us to tomorrow. Now, steam locomotive 7470 finally emerges from the roundhouse. This is why people come from miles around to see 7470 whistle through the valley.
Well, what's different about steam is so much of what you see in the locomotive. I mean, you see the working parts. You have more of an idea of what's making that engine run. I mean, you see the steam, you hear the hiss, and you see the rods, and you know, going back and forth, and you get a sense of, oh, that's how it works. There's a lot of activity. And we turn the turntable, and I mean, there's a whole sort of like a ritual, and people enjoy watching that.
"7470 fills the air with the smell of coal and excitement. Then the crew takes her down the track for the first order of the day.
Once you've dumped the ashes, then we back down the hill to the yard limit board, or just a little beyond, and then the engineer will work the engine up the hill. He'll put the brakes on and then open the throttle up.
It's awesome, you know, the power of the engine. Steam pressure on 18 to 24-inch pistons can move an awful lot of weight.
When you hear the whistle from the steam locomotive, it's like you can hear it through the valley.
Get ready.
After the brake test and after all the passengers are loaded on train number 10, a quick whistle lets everyone know that steam-powered foliage runs through the colorful valley are at last at hand.
All aboard!
Get ready.
If New England has a reputation for anything, it's for its foliage. That 2 or 3 week window right in there where it's just, and it's like watching the most magnificent sunset. And it's all over. I mean, you look around and you see so many different colors, and it changes by the day and by the hour. The different areas along the railroad change at different times.
One of the trackside locations known for its color is West Side Curve, where Les McDonald, Conway Scenic still photographer, is quickly setting up his cameras to catch a shot of 7470 for this once-a-year photo opportunity. In the cab, Courtney waits for Les to finish so he can pull his train up and out of the grade here at West Side Curve. Heading into Conway, 7470 rounds Kennett Curve, giving it everything she's got. Heading back towards North Conway, some passengers have caught the spirit of rail travel here in the comfortable first-class accommodations of the Gertrude Emma, the railroad's parlor observation car. Built by the Pullman Palace Car Company of Illinois in 1898, this beautifully restored sleeper parlor observation car first traveled on the all-new Pennsylvania Limited between New York and Chicago. With its beautiful wood-carved interior and fine amenities, the Gertrude Emma was renamed by this railroad after G. Smith, wife of one of the Conway Scenic Railroad's founders, in recognition of her contributions. The large plate glass windows, individual wicker chairs, and open observation platform make this car a delightful place to view the brilliant fall colors in the valley. With another scheduled train approaching the station platform, passengers wait inside the warm station, seeking refuge from the cool fall air. From the warmth of the station, you can hear the train approaching. Sounds carry in this crisp autumn air, just like the leaves swept aloft by a chill mountain gust and left to fall like rain. Allowing a little more time for 7470 to charge through the woods. In all kinds of fall weather. With winter fast approaching, a snow-covered Mount Washington signals the end of fall. .7470 backs onto the turntable one last time and eases into its warm stall. A parting farewell to its friends, to the mountains, and to the early winter sky. Inside the warm roundhouse, Diesel 4266 is waiting to venture out into the cold, snowy weather ahead. Barely visible in the season's first blizzard, Russ and Gary ready Snow Train 4266 for its series of final runs of the year. Inside the brass whistle gift shop, Dawn and Tracy prepare for the holidays. The gifts and souvenirs are especially appropriate for this time of year. Out in the driving snow, train 4266 quietly pulls away from the station, heading into a winter wonderland.
I want people to take something away from here, not just a memory of a train ride. I want them to take away a piece of the history. Have some fun, understand the past, come back and visit us some more.
As another beautiful summer day begins at the Conway Scenic Railroad, former Canadian National Locomotive 7470 moves out of the old Boston and Maine roundhouse, built in the early 1870s. Slowly guided by the conductor and engineer, number 7470 moves onto the turntable to begin yet another day of moving passengers through the Mount Washington Valley countryside between North Conway and Conway, New Hampshire. Repeating the same routine as it did when Conway Scenic Railroad first opened its doors in 1974. The fireman checks to be sure everything is in proper working order as the engineer moves the locomotive off the table. Slowly and surely, 7470 switches onto the main track to have the tender filled with water. Once this is done and the fire stoked, the locomotive backs down the grade just beyond the North Conway station, where 7470 is exercised. The sound of the steam whistle rebounds off the mountains as engine 7470 returns to the North Conway station to couple up to the passenger cars to begin the first trip of the day. Children, young folk, and old-timers alike are thrilled with the renewed spirit of the great American Iron Horse rumbling through the countryside, bringing to life a sense of adventure once left only to the pages of history books. In 1994, Conway Scenic Railroad began its 21st operating season and found itself on the threshold of its first major expansion. Just west of the North Conway station, the Conway branch connects with the abandoned tracks of the main Central Railroad mountain subdivision through Crawford Notch, a scenic mountain passage that hadn't seen a regular passenger train since 1958. In 1993, the state of New Hampshire took steps to purchase the line and sought proposals from various companies to rehabilitate and operate passenger train excursions. After a lengthy application process, Conway Scenic Railroad was selected to rehabilitate the trackage, provide the train, and operate the service. Brush crews began at Intervale Switch, cutting and chipping over 10 years of growth as they moved west into Bartlett Village. While the work of reopening the line to Bartlett was well underway in the fall of 1994, inspection crews from Conway Scenic Railroad were looking over the rail line through Crawford Notch. A number of problems were found on this section of the line that would require repair before this section of the Crawford Notch line could be returned to service. Soon, Conway Scenic Railroad's trains would be serving the communities between North Conway and Bretton Woods Fabian as they moved up and down the mountains through spectacular Crawford Notch. On September 1st, 1994, Conway Scenic Railroad received a green light from the state to begin reopening the long dormant rail line. On October 10th, the first of many carloads of new ties were distributed between the Intervale Switch and Bartlett Village. The track crew worked nearly every day until late November, inserting new ties and correcting other minor defects.
Yeah, okay, red car right here beside me, please. That's a pretty color. Oh, sorry. Right there.
Saturday, December 17th, 1994, dawned cloudy and cold as the official inaugural run to Bartlett departed North Conway Station at 10 a.m.
Yep, okay. We're gonna be on time today. We got to.
Over 175 VIPs and invited guests were aboard. As the first train moved west on the newly reopened tracks, a steady snow began to fall, creating a magical winter wonderland feeling for the inaugural run. In the spring of 1995, track crews continued to move west up the notch, rehabilitating track in preparation for the resumption of service to Crawford Notch Station. All structures were inspected, including the famed Frankenstein trestle and the Willie Brook Bridge. On August 26, 1995, a round-trip director's special ran between North Conway and Crawford Notch Station. An inaugural run took place on September 1st, 1995, celebrating the reestablishment of rail passenger service to Crawford Notch Station, New Hampshire. Crowds were plentiful all along the route, and the train was cheered at every accessible location along the way. At the old Bemis House, now the Notchland Inn, an old-time community band played on as the train made a brief stop. A truly festive occasion. Passengers were treated to a spectacular view from Frankenstein Trestle of Mount Washington in the distance. From many places along the route, Crawford Notch took on a new appreciation as the train made its way to the Crawford Notch station at the top of the notch. Once the inaugural train arrived at the Crawford Notch station, a delicious chicken barbecue was enjoyed as part of the Top of the Notch festivities. Among the many congratulatory speeches was a proclamation from Governor Steve Merrill, read by Executive Counselor Ray Burton.
In honor of the inaugural run of the Crawford Notch line to Crawford Notch Station on September 1st, 1995, the legend of the railways continues with the return of service to Crawford Notch. This is a historic moment that brings a little history back to the Notch. And that's the citation from Governor Steve Merrill of the state of New Hampshire.
After lunch, the all aboard was announced, and the passengers boarded for the return trip back through the Notch, culminating a spectacular day. But despite this beautiful day, winter was soon to vent its fury. In early November, the winter storms that are so historic throughout the White Mountains had Mother Nature challenging all the hard work of the Conway Scenic Railroad crews. With heavy rain and snowstorms, runoff and some major floods severely damaged several sections of track along the Crawford Notch line. Most significant was the washout and the loss of a bridge at Moores Brook. With the arrival of an early spring in 1996, work crews began to push west along the Crawford Notch line through lingering snow to begin repairs. The Crawford Notch line was reopened on June 22nd, 1996. The spring of 1996 also saw another locomotive arrive at the Conway Scenic Railroad. Locomotive 15 Corporation purchased for lease to the Conway Scenic Railroad former Springfield Terminal number 27, a model GP7 diesel-electric locomotive for service system-wide. The GP7 unit, originally built as Main Central number 573, was removed from service and stored as surplus on March 15, 1996. Representatives of the Conway Scenic Railroad and Locomotive 15 Corporation inspected the locomotive at the Rigby Yard in South Portland, Maine on April 1st. Information received from various sources suggested that Main Central number 573 was probably the most frequently painted locomotive on the railroad, due in part to being the last locomotive fitted with a serviceable steam generator. The generator provided heat on inspection specials and passenger extras. This locomotive received a number of one-of-a-kind paint schemes during its colorful history and was briefly lettered for the Delaware and Hudson in 1984. Main Central number 573 is no stranger to North Conway, having operated as the trailing unit along with Main Central number 470 on the Operation Lifesaver train through Crawford Notch on September 26, 1983. A highlight of that trip was the backing of the train over the Conway Scenic Railroad line from Intervale, New Hampshire to North Conway, using the old Boston and Maine Conway branch tracks. Finally, on July 1st, 1996, engine number 27 arrived at North Conway Yard and was placed in service on train number 11 from North Conway to Bartlett and return on July 6th, 1996. One of engine number 573's duties is to power the Sunset Special dinner train. Food service is provided by Horse Feathers Restaurant. Passengers enjoy a delicious four-course meal as the spectacular scenery passes by and the sun slowly sets on the Mount Washington Valley. A pleasant and always romantic train ride back into time. August 14th, 1995, two new locomotives arrived at the Conway Scenic Railroad. Engines numbered 6505 and 6516 were purchased by the Locomotive 15 Corporation and leased to the Conway Scenic Railroad. Both engines were former Via Rail Canada Model FP9 diesel-electric locomotives. Only 86 FP9s were rebuilt by General Motors Diesel in London, Ontario between 1980 and 1981. The locomotives were received from Canada by way of Whitefield, New Hampshire. Conway Scenic Railroad at number 6516 was placed in service on September 16, 1995 on the Crawford Notch train. And engine number 6505 entered full operational service on September 23, 1996. Additionally, 4 retired Canadian National Electric commuter coaches were added to the Conway Scenic Railroad. All 4 coaches were built in 1952 by Canadian Car and Foundry and were retired from the Montreal commuter pool in mid-1995. In August of 1996, the Conway Scenic Railroad hosted a reunion of the Evans family, whose lives are chronicled in the book, Life by the Tracks. Gordon and Raymond Evans are the 2 surviving members of 4 children who, along with their mother Hattie, lived in the Willard section house along the main central tracks located near the west end of Willybrook Bridge. As part of the reunion, Gordon, Raymond, and family members visited the old section house site and reminisced about old times.
We're standing here and looking at the foundation of the house. Where did you 2 boys have your room? Where was your room?
Right over the living room.
Oh, on that end?
And then right.
In the round tower? It was pretty close to the railroad.
10 feet, I guess.
10 feet from the railroad. So you knew every moment that train was going by.
That's right.
And coming.
After a while, we never noticed it, but
yeah,
you know it was
at the
going
time,
by.
at the time, you certainly did. And then if you wanted to walk, like when you boys worked at the Crawford House,
Yeah, right.
you would just walk to work up the railroad track?
And my mother was right.
We both caddied and we walked from here to the golf course.
The other side of the Crawford House.
Which is the other side of the Crawford House. That was a pretty good walk. It's about 1.5 miles to the Crawford House.
In the afternoon and evening, our mother would walk halfway up there and wait for us.
And wait for you to come out of work.
Yeah.
So just talk about a little bit the going to school. You went to school according to according to the train schedule.
That's right. First I started into Bartlett, and you didn't go to Bartlett, did you? Bartlett, and then we went to Bemis.
I remember going to Bartlett.
Then they took the morning train off, and they went over to Britton Woods, Twin Mountain. First went to Britton Woods, Fabians, then went to Twin Mountain.
To school?
School.
Okay. And then when one of the trains went off, you went down to Bemis? Well, that was the train that went off?
Yeah.
Okay.
The morning train.
Okay.
Because they used to have, years ago, they used to have passenger trains run every few hours. And they kept cutting down, the same as they do today.
And how did they stop as we just did right now and were let off? How did those passenger trains? They must have been pretty heavy.
Well, on the passenger train, to get on, they'd scoop us up one at a time. We'd be 25, 30 feet apart.
Okay.
Scoop us up.
The conductor.
Yeah, brakeman.
Okay.
Brakeman probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Grammy would space you out standing alone.
We'd know where to go anyway.
Yeah. And then if you turned around now and the house is behind you, it's not very far away from the track. You didn't have much room up here.
No.
Porch was pretty direct.
Well, we
The
separated.
porch was now
That chair is.
where one of those lawn chairs is.
Yeah.
That's not very much space.
When they plowed it, snow would go up on the porch.
And they had steel grills so the snow wouldn't break the glass.
What about you doing the night watchman? Is that what you did on the railroad?
We took our turns doing it, yeah.
Between
We'd
you
do
and
it
Raymond?
in the spring, they were afraid of slides, muds and rocks. And we had that choice of doing it as a volunteer deal, I guess. We got paid 55 cents for doing it. We would take that little push car and go way down to the end of the section, wait till the freight started come up, and pump ahead of it up to Crawford Notch and go to bed. And we got an hour and a half paying for it. If the freight was late an hour, it was 2 hours and a half, we still got an hour and a half paid for it.
Okay.
That was before the union days.
That was before the union days.
We finished our own uniform, too.
Hero.
On September 1st, 1996, passenger service was extended west to Fabian Station from Crawford Notch. Passenger service now leaves North Conway, passes through Bartlett, and climbs through Crawford Notch, and begins a descent to Fabian Station. All in the shadow of Mount Washington. On this part of the Crawford Notch line, passengers can view the spectacular and historic Mount Washington Hotel. Fabian Station served as the departure point for the Mount Washington Hotel and was also the connection to the Cog Railroad that climbs to the top of the 6,288-foot Mount Washington, the highest mountain in the Northeast.
All right. Well, good afternoon.
With the return of passenger service to Fabian Station, the Crawford Notch line covers almost 30 miles of track and climbs over 1,300 feet, thrilling passengers from all over the world with the trip of a lifetime. The incredible view of the White Mountains comes to life on the Conway Scenic Railroad in the fall with a splendid palette of fall foliage as the colors of fall paint Crawford Notch and the Mount Washington Valley brilliant reds, oranges, and yellows.
The beauty of the station here is that it sits in just behind the Common. We call it Schuler Park, but in early days it was called the Common, and it's a green area. It was gifted to the town by the Boston and Maine so that there will never be a building erected on that particular piece of property, and so the station will always be viewed as the center of North Conway Village. And it really is right in the, almost in the physical center of our town.
Well, we have a fleet of 15 operating pieces of passenger equipment here. It's a pretty good sized fleet. We've got the 1 steam locomotive and 5 diesel locomotives. In high season, we run up to 9 cars on the Notch train and 6 cars on the Valley train. So that's all of our operating equipment. And the Notch train, we use the 2 Yellowbirds, which gives us 4,500 horsepower on the train going up the mountain, and one of the 1,500 horsepower engines here in the valley. So 7 trips for a full day in high season between the valley trains and the Notch train. So that's a lot of activity, and those are one-way trips. So you know, round trip, and there's actually 14 trains during the course of a day. It's a lot of horn blowing here in the valley. And not only that, we run special charter trains with the Bud car or the other equipment too, depending on what day it is and what's available. Conway Scenic Railroad is located in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, so we really are a mountain railroad. If you look down the hill toward Conway, this is actually the steepest hill on the line. It's got a 3.25% grade. Actually, when we're going up toward Crawford, the steepest is about 2.2% up there. So you can imagine, with that type of a grade,
the tremendous pressures that are on the couplers here. When they're hooked together, pulling force on that is thousands of pounds. It's up, 40,000 pounds or so pulling on these couplers. They take a tremendous amount of strain. During the daily inspection, the engineer is required to look over the inside of the locomotive, check the oil, look at the water, the cooling water, to make sure that that's in the proper location. Then you also check pull the dipstick on the air compressor, make sure the oil levels are proper there. And then it's very important to go and walk around the outside of the locomotive. Here we are in the cab of a 1956 built Electromotive Division GP9 diesel locomotive. It's got 1,750 horsepower. Okay, so now we're going to push the engine start switch to start the locomotive.
Until train time, train for Conway leaving in 2 minutes. All aboard.
Hi, I'm Elsa. Nice to meet you. Okay, you folks can go up and into your left.
Yes, right. It's not just the train ride. You get to enjoy the facility. We let people walk all through the yard. We do ask that they stay off the cabooses up there because those are privately owned. People stay in those. But you can get right up close to the turntable. There's a steam locomotive that's on display. We do ask that you don't climb on the equipment for safety's sake, but you are free to walk all through the yard and see what we're up to. You can look through the windows in the roundhouse and see what our latest project is. And there's always something going on here. It is a living, working museum. Yep. And particularly when the steam locomotive is running, it brings the the smell of soft coal smoke and hot oil and things like that, that's what really makes it special, is when it's one thing to see something that's quote unquote stuffed and mounted in a museum, but it's another to come and hear the sounds and smell the smells of an actual working railroad. We have restored practically every piece of equipment that has arrived at the railroad since the beginning has been in the roundhouse for some kind of restoration work of one sort or another. Gertrude Emma was built in 1898. It's a wooden car, so it's had siding work done, it's had roof work done. We put all brand new wheels under it several years ago since I've been here. And like I said, it's just amazing what our crew is capable of doing. Woodwork, metalwork, anything, air work, anything that needs to be done, we can pretty much do. Some things we have to go outside for, but not very many. The most recent project was the table car, the Webster, and that was a coach, and we converted it to a very fine car that seats 60 at tables of 4 and tables of 2. And there's somewhere there's photos of what it looked like when we started and what it looked like when we finished. And it's nothing new. The railroad, Russ has been doing that right before him on a regular basis. The dining car Chicora was made from a coach. When we got the dining car Hattie Evans here, that was an empty shell. And if you look at it today and see what it is and how comfortable it is to ride in and eat in, it really is nothing short of amazing what we're able to accomplish here. When equipment arrives at Conway Scenic Railroad, it's here because somebody at some other railroad was done with it. So it's come here and it's got a second in life. We've got, we always talk about 1898 and the Gertrude Emma, which is remarkable that's got to be the oldest Pullman car operating in daily service. I'm sure there's somebody out there says, oh, well, there's one. But I'm talking standard gauge, okay? And, but the red cars were built for the Central of New Jersey Railroad. Those were built in the 1920s. Then they were obsolete 30 years ago. And people love those cars, and they're in good condition. And we run them every single day with great success. The notch cars, the majority of those cars were built in 1952. And, you know, they have exceeded their design life. Those were the words I'm looking for. Design life has exceeded long ago. But they fulfill our needs very nicely. And it makes a real good fleet of cars. Well, 7470, of course, was the first engine that Dwight Smith bought for the railroad. And he bought it in 1968 up in Sarnia, Ontario, Canada. And for a while, it was over in Portland, Maine, where they did quite a little work to it. And then it arrived here, came up the Conway branch. Most people think it came in off the Main Central, but it actually came in from Dover up through Ossipee, up the line to here. So, and it was here where it made its first trip on August 4th, 1974. And it's been more or less in continuous service here since that time. And 7470 is a New Hampshire icon. It's the only standard gauge coal-fired locomotive operating in the state. You have some other locomotives around, but they don't. They're not standard gauge, or they're not coal-fired. So it's a pretty important piece of machinery to us here.
What I'm doing in here is I'm using a needle scaler, air-powered, to remove any scale and rust.
Okay, here we have the 1-foot grid pattern on the drum of the boiler, which every intersection we've cleaned the boiler so we can do an ultrasound test. And as we go back to the stayed area of the boiler, which is all flat sheet, we've ground a little place to test it between every single stay bolt. And there's probably 1,000 or more of all these marks, because we do the drum of the boiler on the outside, but we do have to do inside the firebox on the stayed part of the boiler.
So we're hoping to have that back in 2017 for use again. A lot of people out there looking forward to the return of 7470.
This is a very historic station that was built in 1874. And when Conway Scenic Railroad began their operation, well, of course, this was one of the first buildings that they rehabilitated. And it's been, we've been very, very careful about not changing a whole lot of things. You have to try to modernize, but we haven't changed a whole lot of things. So the building was built in 1874, and Conway Scenic Railroad started in 1974 and rehabbed the station and began operating the trains here at the North Conway terminal. The train only went down as far as Conway Village, which is about 5.5 miles from here. In the beginning, there were 3 gentlemen who came together. Bill Levy, who owned part of the property, Carol Reed, who was a business man here in town and owned the station, and Dwight Smith. And Dwight brought his, he had purchased a scrap locomotive from Canada and brought that into the mix. So the 3 of them shared equally in the ownership of the railroad and began to run trains in 1974. This is a free museum. It's open to the public when we're open, and it's a wonderful opportunity for people to see the history of the railroad as you walk along and you see some of the older pictures of the station. There are lots of artifacts that have been collected here so people can see what a ticket or a schedule looked like in the olden days. Some of the instruments that they used that we no longer have available, the turntable, some of the old steam engines, things like that. These are fascinating pieces of artifacts that people really enjoy, and they love to show their children some of the old things that they know about, but their children have never been introduced to at all. The three major buildings here on the property, the station, the roundhouse, and the freight house, were all built in the same year, 1874. The roundhouse is a 4-stall roundhouse, and it is our maintenance facility. We use mainly 2 of the stalls all the time for working in. And stall number 1 includes an inspection pit, which is fairly new. We added a larger inspection pit several years ago. So it's 75 feet long and 5 feet deep. So we can get underneath the engines and do all the inspections without having to crawl on a belly like a reptile. And also when we were doing that, we installed a radiant heat in the floor. So we have really upgraded that facility for the workers, which has really been a marvel, because we can set the temperature over there at about 63 or 64 degrees. The floor is warm, and they stay warm and toasty at that temperature, believe it or not, all through the winter, even if it's blowing, 40 miles an hour and 20 degrees below zero. Why do they call it a roundhouse? Well, the reason they call it a roundhouse is because if you look in front of the building, there's a turntable. The turntable is 85 feet in diameter, and it moves around on a big pedestal. It services all 4 of the stalls that we have. Roundhouses in many of the major metropolitan areas like Detroit and Buffalo and Boston, had roundhouses that were almost fully encompassing the turntable. There was only one track that was open to the outside. In other words, they would fill all the stalls with the steam engines particularly, and that's where all the maintenance took place in the roundhouse. And then when an engine was ready to go, they would turn the turntable to it, put it on the table, turn it to the house track, and the house track would take it out and put it into service. So we have one track that leads to the roundhouse, the house track, and we have the turntable, and then we have 4 stalls. We like to have our engine lead one way. We can't turn it around down in Conway, so we have it lead up the hill. So when we bring our engine out in the morning, we turn it on the turntable because it's always facing, the front of the engine is facing south. When we operate between North Conway and Conway, we want the engine to face north. So we bring it out on the table, turn it 180 degrees, and then put it on the train. Some procedure in reverse at night. When we put it on the turntable and then turn it 180 degrees and put it away. The reason for that is that the house has a slope roof. The front of it is the tallest part, and that's where the stack is.
We are in the midst of a real, live, genuine Boston and Maine Railroad terminal, which consists of the station, the freight house, turntable, and the roundhouse. And I can't think another place anywhere on the Boston and Maine system that is as complete as this location is today. And that's thanks to Dwight Smith and Carol P. Reed and Bill Levy having the foresight to preserve what is now gone in just about every other location. So you've got a turntable in front of the roundhouse that was built in 1918. And as far as I know, that replaced the turntable that was put in there in 1872. As time goes on, locomotives get longer, heavier, so they needed to replace the turntable. And as I have been known to say, that's a super deluxe turntable over there because it has an air motor in it, which most turntables of many, you have to push around by hand. There are other ones in large terminals like down at Boston Engine Terminal are electrically powered. They have a motor in it that drives it around. This one has got a reciprocating air motor in it. And I'm not an expert on these things by any means, but I've never seen another one that's set up quite like this one. So you bring your locomotive on it, you hook the air from the brake pipe to the motor, it fills up the air tanks that are mounted on the table, and it'll, you open the air valve and it goes around Just it's like a little steam engine, only it runs on air underneath. It's a pretty special piece of equipment to see that. And when steam is running, we've got it set up so that the locomotive comes out of stall 1, goes on the table, and then we run it in the opposite direction. So every day we turn it around in the morning. That always causes a crowd to gather to see that operation.
And then in 1994, the state of New Hampshire purchased what's called the Mountain Division. We put our heads together and we offered a proposal to the state, which was accepted in the spring and fall of 1994. We rehabbed from Intervale all the way to Bartlett and operated our first inaugural train from North Conway to Bartlett on December 17th, 1994. In 1994, in the spring of 1994, we were able to go and inspect the Mountain Division, primarily from Bartlett on up to Crawford Station, because there had not been in that area since 1986. We were able to get through, but only because we took a high rail truck. In some cases, we had to go to certain points and then back up and come back around because there might have been a bridge that wasn't safe, washout, wash-ins, all sorts of things that needed to be fixed. So in the spring and summer of 1995, we did a lot of tie replacements and made other repairs to the bridges and all the track structures so that we could get through. We cut trees. I'm sort of remembering some of the scenes that we had where we might have 8 or 10 guys out there and they were cutting trees and they drag them up to the chipper and throw them in the chipper. And we did that for days and weeks and, on end. It required the replacement of thousands of ties because the ties were old and worn, and it literally thousands of trees that had to be removed that had grown up in the years that the track had been abandoned. So it was quite a project, and there were quite a few people who worked on that. And we operated our inaugural train to Crawford Station in September of that year. As we were working and rehabbing the track, we also were exploring the possibilities of new equipment that we were going to add, because we needed to have 2 train sets because we were operating a train between Conway and North Conway, and soon to run that between North Conway, and Bartlett in a continuous loop during the day. But we needed a second train set in order to run what we call the notch train. Basically, what we did was we upgraded our locomotives so that we had larger locomotives, more powerful locomotives operating on the notch train, and also they had the capability of using dynamic brakes.
We have what we call the Yellowbirds, which is that was a main central term they used for a series of locomotives. And actually, they had, I think it was 13 GP38s in the 200 series. We have the 252, which is one of those main central locomotives. And we also have the 216, which is, that is a GP35. It's actually 1 year older than the other engine, but it's higher horsepower. 252 is 2,000 horsepower. 216 is 2,500 horsepower. And what's really special about these locomotives is that they have dynamic brakes. Dynamic brake takes the traction motors that are under the engines and turns them into generators to make resistance, so that when you're going downhill, they act as a brake. And that's pretty important on this mountain railroad that we have up here. The Frankenstein trestle, what I can tell you about it is it's built on a curve. It's not a straight bridge. Frankenstein is on a curve, and it's got not only a curve, but it's also a gradient. I don't know what the difference from one end to the other is, but I'll bet you it's about 12 feet or so. 87 feet off the ground, and I should know exactly how long it is. I think it's like 500 feet long, but somebody will tell me I'm wrong on that. And it's built out of steel, and it's been rebuilt 3 times. The last time around 1949, 1950 to make it so it could handle the weights of modern-day locomotives and cars. The state of New Hampshire's bridge department takes great pride in working on those bridges. There's something out of the ordinary other than a highway bridge for those guys. And they really enjoy working on them and keeping them in safe and suitable condition for service. Gateway had to be blasted open with black powder in 1877 when they were building the railroad through there. There's pictures of narrow gauge railroad that they built temporarily in the notch to handle a lot of the boulders that were taken out of there. When you're leaving, going through there and seeing that opening in the rock that was blasted out, and then of course it opens up into the vista of the valley, and that's the money shot up there when you come around that curve and the valley opens up beneath you. Well, I think at the closest you could probably reach out and touch that rock wall, so maybe 18 inches or so. You know, in 2009 we brought up a generator, big, well, it was a transformer, and the rock wall was so close there that the load had to come on a Schnabel car, which actually moved laterally. When we get to that point, they had to reposition the car hydraulically so it could get around that outcropping of rock there.
One of the first assignments that I had when I came here and joined the 3 gentlemen as an owner in the corporation was to build a dining car. For a number of years, they had struggled with whether to do that or not do that. And so they thought that I was a pretty good guinea pig and they could make me do that. So in 1992, we began to rehab what is now called the dining car Chicorowa. And this project was a very interesting project because I made a number of mistakes while I went through it, but we did make it a success. And one of the principles that I felt was very important for us was to make sure that meals were not catered, meals were prepared on board. And so we incorporate a kitchen into our dining car operations so that all your meals are prepared the way you like them. So your steaks, your fish, whatever you have, your chicken is all prepared on board. The dining car Chicorowa has been in operation since September of 1992 and was joined in 2010 with the Hattie Evans. The difference between those two is that the Hattie Evans had been totally gutted, and so when we took it over, we were able to really build what we wanted to in terms of the seating. And I think we did a better job on that particular car of comfort for the customer in terms of the bench seating, the tables, and all the amenities that are in that car. One of the features of the Hattie that I'd like to bring to your attention is the fact that there are murals on the ceiling, on the curved part of the ceiling, that are actual scenes from Crawford Notch. And those particular murals were painted by a lady that I commissioned to do that. So those are real, genuine acrylic paintings that we have mounted on the walls. So our effort is to recreate that experience that many people experienced in the olden days when railroads operated to a much greater extent than they do today, and also to introduce a lot of people who have never even been on a train, let alone had a meal on a train, to that experience. And we find that they love it and they come back time and time again. Let me just go on briefly about the cars that we acquired in Montreal. We acquired 4 coach cars that had been used in commuter service in Montreal. They were a little bit beat up, but they were usable by us after some extensive rehabilitation. So those became the coach cars that we used on our Notch train. Those were 3 of the cars were put into service very quickly. We were able to then add to that consist by purchasing a cafe car, which we now call the CP Reed in honor of Carol. And that operates as a first-class car on our Notch train. Whenever we say first class on our trains, we are talking about normally an air-conditioned car, climate-controlled car, with a little bit upscale seating, a little plusher seating. And also on the Notch train, the service that we offer in our first-class cars would include beverage service. And we also, of course, now have the Hattie Evans, which is our dining car that operates every day on the Notch train, serving 2 lunches, one on the way up and one on the way down. Each of our trains offers coach, first class, and dining service. Our Valley train and our Notch train, both of those offer that type of service. On each of those trains, we also offer an open car, air car on each of the trains. So people, if they want to enjoy their ride without any glass in front of them, can go to the open car. It's open to anybody on the train. The Dorothea May is one of our best first-class cars, most popular, both in the summer and particularly in the fall, when, of course, there are many, many people who come to see the fall colors here in the North Country, and our train is one of the best ways to view fall colors because you don't have to drive, and you can spend all your time talking with your friends and enjoying the scenery. When we acquired the car that now is called the Hattie Evans, the first thing that we wanted to try to do was come up with a good name. And lo and behold, it occurred to us that one of the most historic figures that is part of the history of the Notch was a lady by the name of Hattie Evans. She and her husband, Loring, and their 4 children lived at one of the section houses near Mount Willard. Loring was killed in an accident when he was doing some switching. He worked for the railroad. He was doing some switching at Crawford, and he was killed and run over by the train in a snowstorm. Hattie stayed on at the house, and she served as the cook and caretaker, if you will, for many of the section crews that worked up there. Plus, she raised her 4 children in that house. And there are many, many stories in a little book called Life by the Tracks that depict the types of things that happen in daily life for a family living on the side of a mountain in the North Country.
The order is engine 7470 and 4266 run extra from North Conway to Glen and return from 10 to 1200. Not protecting against extra trains. Date is correct. It's a real effort to operate in the wintertime. We do, we end with an event generally the first weekend in January. And so that's always this snow and ice and everything around. What's nice about that is we're the only ones that are crazy enough to be doing an event that time of year. So we get a lot of people come out for that event in January. That's sponsored by the Mass Bay Railroad Enthusiasts. And normally that's been a steam event, but with the steam engine down, we'll be doing it with diesel this year. When the steam engine is running and it's cold weather, that's the best time to see the steam vapor. And you've got nice shots of steam in the snow and in winter conditions. And I always say, anytime anybody's taking a picture of the steam engine, it's a horizontal when the weather is warm. But in cold conditions, it goes to vertical because you've got all that steam and smoke that goes way, way up in the sky and stays, for quite some time. It's very impressive. So that makes us forget a little bit about how hard it is to run in the winter. But it is a real effort. The snowplow is an interesting piece. The one we have here belonged to Clyde Forbes and the Twin States Railroad, operated between Whitefield and St. Johnsburg most recently. It's impressive because it digs out between the rails underneath and also has wings that wing back about 3 feet on both sides. It has to be lifted at the crossings. It's called the flanger that's underneath. So the guy that's operating can control the wings going in and out and lifts the flanger up and down.
we had an opportunity to look at an RDC, a rail diesel car, a number of years ago over in Syracuse, New York, and we did acquire that car. It can seat approximately 80 people. We put a bathroom into it, and what we do with that is use it for the beginning of the season, shoulder seasons, and special excursions. Sometimes somebody comes and they want to go on a ride, but they don't want to fit into the schedule that we already have defined. And we will offer a ride on what we call the Millie, which is our RDC, our rail diesel car. And we can take them anywhere they want to go. We typically don't go up through the notch. We typically use it for rides between North Conway and Bartlett, North Conway and Glen, to the cider mill in North Conway and Conway itself. So it's a great little car, particularly to fill in the weekdays when we're beginning in the season, when there aren't that many people that would require the use of the whole train. So it's worked out to be very profitable for us.
The Bud car. That Bud car is pretty special. It's named after Russ's mother, the Millie, and it was built in 1952 for the New Haven Railroad. It's the only self-propelled operating Bud car in the state of New Hampshire. There are other cars in the state that are used they're pulled by locomotives, but this is the only one that still operates under its own power. And it's got its original engines in them. They're General Motors 6 110 engines. There's two of them that are hooked to an Alice Chalmers automatic transmission. And they develop about, I think it's 550 horsepower is what's under the car. And those are engines that were, I'm told, originally built for tanks during World War II. They were in tank service. And then General Motors adapted them for buses, and then they got a lot of use in the Bud cars.
Over the years, we've added a number of events, such as a day out with Thomas, and that's a very, very popular event for families, and we draw from quite a distance for those events. And one of the reasons that they are really popular is because they enjoy the train ride, and they also enjoy all the things that we provide for them in terms of extra things to do here on the property. We do have the motor cars. Those are the little putt-putts that people are familiar with that used to be used as inspection cars by train personnel. We also have, during Thomas, we have Imagination Station, where the kids do all sorts of crafts and interesting things that are geared for the younger folks that are attracted by Thomas. We also provide trains to the pumpkin patch. We create an area where we have pumpkins so that the kids can get off the train, pick out their pumpkins before Halloween, and bring those back with them and take them home.
The town of Conway celebrated its 250th anniversary in 2015.
So there was a big festival for the 4th of July, and we provided transportation from Conway to North Conway for many of the folks who did not want to get caught up in the traffic that would accumulate up here in the village. And then at the end of the day, after the fireworks and everybody was ready to go home, we put together a 15-car train, and we took them all back down to the station down in Conway, and they were quite happy to be able to be that far away from all the congestion, pop in their cars, and head for home.
And people had such a great time. They enjoyed it so much. We decided we're going to do it every year from now on.
In the olden days, when the train first started up as Conway Scenic Railroad, we operated from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and then we started extending the season as more and more people stayed around town longer. It finally got to Columbus Day, and we are now operating beyond Columbus Day. We're operating actually trains every day until through the third week of October. And then we take a little bit of a break and we do weekends only in November. And then we have our Santa trains around Christmas time. And we also operate a train. Usually by the end of December, we are in full winter operation. And so the week between Christmas and New Year's is quite popular for us because people are up here to go skiing and they don't ski all day long. They like to come down, bring the kids down and take a ride on the train.
Any railroad is a capital intensive business because it's, there are bridges out there, there are crossings, there are signals, lots to it. When we did the work at Moat Brook a few years ago, I think that was like a $40,000 project to replace just half of the timbers that were involved down there. That's on our part of the line that we own. So we're responsible for the entire amount down there. The work on Frankenstein Trestle and Willowbrook Bridge, I don't know what that amounted to, but it was very, very expensive. And that falls under state ownership. So they bore the major cost of it. We participated with them. We're good partners with the state, but it's capital intensive. And one single tie installed in the roadbed, by the time you buy the tie, the spikes, the tie plates, and the labor to put it in, is worth $100. That's what it costs to put one tie in. So you count the number of ties per mile and multiply that times 100, and it's a costly business. Yep. Right here, Wendell is tightening a track joint. The rails bolted together. Every rail is 33 feet long, so at the end of every rail, you have a joint. And as you imagine, the train goes from one rail to the other, it creates like a vibration. So over the course of time, the joints will loosen up. So it's required that we come along from time to time and do exactly what Wendell is doing here, tighten those bolts so you've got a nice solid joint. And you want your joints to be tight so it doesn't attack the, hammer the ties that are underneath, and also batter the rail ends down. So good practice to have all your joints nice and tight. Right? High rails are so handy because you can just go one way down the railroad tracks, and then when you get to your destination, you take off and you can drive back on the highway. And once he's got the wheel up, he locks it in place with a pin. And now the vehicle is suitable for the road. So it's a little bit tricky to get it off here because of the way this is a short crossing. A typical day's operation starts with somebody coming in. Generally, there's somebody here at 6:30, 7 o'clock, opening the door to the station. We have guys over at the roundhouse getting the engine ready. If it's steam, they're starting definitely by 7 o'clock, breaking the bank up and doing everything that's necessary to get the steam locomotive ready to go. If it's the diesel, it doesn't take quite as long. But even the diesel, you start it up and then you go around and check your oil and the water and walk around and make sure that it's in good operating condition, that all the pieces and parts are there. The train crew, the conductor and trainmen come in and they walk through the train, make sure everything is clean and neat. They sweep the cars and clean the windows. Then when the locomotive is attached to the train, the air is pumped up and they do a inspection of the brakes. While that's going on, the people who are involved at the dining car are getting their supplies on board and beginning to prepare the food for the day's lunches and dinner. And then once all that has been done, we have a safety meeting.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. All right. Engineer of train 163. Conductor train 163. Engineer of train 10. Conductor of train 10. All right. So a couple of mechanical issues were brought to my attention this morning.
We talk about anything that's out of the ordinary for the day. We always talk about, we go through our rule book, which is there's about 1,000 rules in the rule book, and we pick one rule and read it and talk about it. And then there's also a set of bulletin orders that has to be reviewed every day. So if something has happened out there on the railroad, that gets recorded on the bulletin orders. I am responsible for writing the bulletin orders. Like if a crossing is out of service, got hit by a car or something like that, you have to stop and protect such and such a crossing. All those things are done. And then 10:15, we start boarding the first train that's going to Conway. 10:30, he's gone to Conway. As soon as he goes, we bring the Notch train over and, they start boarding and head for the Notch. And in between that, we do a radio check, and we're very, very safety conscious here. Yeah, at the end of the day, we have to make sure that everything is secured properly, locked down for the night. Didn't talk about draining the holding tanks and adding fresh water. That has to be done daily, sometimes in the morning. And when we're running the dinner train at 6 o'clock, we also have to do it again in the afternoon to make sure there's plenty of supply of water and room in the holding tanks. So there's an awful lot to it. We've got maybe 20 employees involved during the course of a day, including the shop crew and the track guys that are out. There's a guy out patrolling or inspecting track every day. I think overall we have a pool of about 60 employees. They're not all working at the same time, but we have a pool of 60 people that we draw from to operate the railroad. I want to say a word about the employees. Practically everybody here, in almost all cases, are here because they want to be here working for the railroad. They take special pride in working for this company that has some wonderful hardware. You look around, it's beautiful hardware, but it's the human element that makes the hardware come to life. And I want to compliment all of our people for being so friendly and willing to talk with all of our passengers and take care of their needs and comfort, but also relate to them in a special way that demonstrates the value of this very special historic railroad.
One of the important feelings that we have about operating Conway Scenic Railroad here in North Conway is the fact that this is a historic, recognized as a historic property, and also because the trains are a part of a history, an important part of our history. Many people know that the nation was drawn together coast to coast by the trains, but the trains don't seem to have the relevance that they used to have for a lot of people. And so when we operate our historic trains, it gives them a connection with the past and also allows them to see the viability of rail transportation and how people can be moved in large numbers from point to point on a very, very modern piece of equipment. Ours are older cars, but they have nice amenities. Many of the first-class cars are air-conditioned, so you are riding in comfort and you can enjoy the scenery from your seat. We don't stand still. We like to be making progress. We like to be improving the equipment that we have. We like to be offering what the customers are asking us for. And I think that's a very, very important thing, and that's one of the reasons we are successful in operating a tourist railroad. We don't stand still. We want to make progress. We offer services like the dining cars, both the Valley train and the Notch train. And we offer first-class accommodations. Many people want, even in today's economy, they want first-class service, and we try to provide that to them.
This is a heritage railroad. And so what we mean by that is this is the way railroads were run typically in 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. What we do here is resembles what happens on modern railroads, but we are preserving a different period of, of operations. And I think you need to look back and see where we've been in order to turn around and look frontwards and see where you're going. So here we're preserving the past. This is, what your grandmother or great-grandparents, how they got around the countryside by riding trains like this. And we also operate the railroad with the standard operating code, which is a system of written orders. And that's also, that way of operating railroads has gone by the boards. You don't see that on modern railroads anymore. So we've preserved not only the railroad and the cars and the locomotives, but also the way we operate it, so that a person can, it's very authentic for a railroad that was running 20, 30, 40 years ago. I just get a great deal of satisfaction in kind of taking a step back and watching things run and and understanding that those who came before us really knew what they were doing. And we had a tremendous system of railroads in the United States right up until the Eisenhower era, when the thruways came in and everybody had their own automobile, and it was much faster to go wherever you wanted to at your own, you could go when you wanted to go. At that point, we started assembling a rail system that was among the best in the world. And it's a shame that it fell apart, because, but that's, we're keeping our piece of it going. Well, I hope the railroad continues to thrive. Nothing makes me happier than to have a young man or a young woman, kids, boys and girls come and say, they'll say, "This is my first ride on a train." We love that. This is about bringing it to the next generation. So I am hoping that we're here for many years to come to give kids their first train ride. Some adults too, teenagers. I've never been on a train, so we like to have that happen. It puts them in touch with the past, and it's an enjoyable experience, particularly going up to the Notch. Any of our train rides are fun, but what I like about it is get away from the modern day electronics, spend some time with your family, and it's a real good experience. This is really, I call this hallowed ground. It's special place. I mean, we're in a building that was built in 1874. How many of those do you know? That not only was it built in 1874, but it's doing what it was built and designed to do, 141 years ago. How many places like that are left? So many things, old buildings have been repurposed, which is great. But to actually have this building full of people who are about to go on a train ride, that's awesome.